John chapter 6, if you'll turn there, and if you have something to put in Matthew chapter 14, that will help you out also. If you didn't get enough these, thous, thines in the last song we did, you'll get a few more this evening. So it was kind of breaking you in for these, thous, and thines, and the ifs. John chapter 6 is where we'll start. We'll start with going to the Lord in prayer. Father, I do ask for your blessing upon this evening, Lord. Don't let it be me, just let it be you. For it is the Lord that makes all this possible, and it is your Son, Jesus, that makes it possible as we're studying on Sundays to come within that veil and into your presence, God. And we just thank you for Jesus, and may he reign tonight. In Jesus' holy name, amen. All right. Looking at material goods versus spiritual awakenings, and which one are we really looking for in life? Either Ravi Zacharias or Alistair Begg told a story. It was one of those guys. It was a guy that rolled his R's anyway. But it was about these two brothers in a town, and they were both dirty, rotten, stinking scoundrels. And they told this story, and the one of the brothers died. And the other brother came to the pastor and said, I need you to do the funeral, but I need you to tell everybody that he was a saint. And he's like, I can't do that. He says, look, I'll give you a whole lot of money, but you got to tell everybody in town that this guy was a saint. And he's like, I just can't do that. And he's like, look, here's a whole bunch of money. You got to tell him. He's like, okay. So he did the funeral. And in the funeral, he said, this fella cheated everybody he ran into. He was a liar, he was a crook, he was a drunk, but compared to his brother, he was a saint. So he got his saint in there. I don't know if there's any spiritual awakening that went on for the fella's brother or not, but he chose to deliver the truth as opposed to just collecting cash. There's a feller down there in Houston who is hard-pressed to tell the truth. There's another fella in a church in Seattle, this big deal this week, who his church spent $200 and some odd thousand buying his book so he could be on the bestseller list, so he could tell everybody, I'm on the New York Times bestseller list. So what is really important in life? Is it a status symbol? Is it where you rank? Is it what all you can write on your business card? Or is it just that I am a disciple of Jesus Christ? A disciple basically means student, learner, follower. And this is where we have a very big test of this discipleship in John chapter 6. It's got two very familiar stories in it, probably the first two I ever saw on flannel graph back in Sunday school. But I think the story really starts in John chapter 5, verse 39, where it says, search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me, speaking Jesus of himself. But chapter 6 starts out here. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great multitude followed him, because they saw his miracles, which he did on them that were diseased. And Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples, and the Passover feast of the Jews was nigh, or near. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes, he saw a great company come unto him, and he said unto Philip, whence shall we go buy bread that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, or to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, well, there's a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so all the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down. And likewise of the fish as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the miracles that Jesus did, said, "This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world." Here we have a bunch of guys that came and crashed Jesus' alone time. That tells us in the other Gospels that in Gospel of Mark, it tells us that he had just sent out the disciples, 12 disciples, to go and minister on their own, healing, casting out demons, and Jesus was all by himself. And he got the news in between chapter 5 and chapter 6 of John that John the Baptist had just been killed. So Jesus was kind of down and depressed, and it tells us in Luke that Jesus says to the disciples, "Hey, y'all just got back from a long journey. Let's go to this desert place and we'll just chill out here alone by ourselves and just be with one another." Well, all the people saw where Jesus was going, because it's kind of like when I'm driving around in a 40-foot car, people look at you, and Jesus, people watched him. Where he went, they went. So Jesus really didn't get any alone time, even though he wanted to mourn the death of his cousin, much less the last great prophet from the Old Testament time period. But they wouldn't even leave him alone for that. So they all gathered around and came crashing his party. And Jesus, being Jesus, went and healed them, taught them of the kingdom of God. And it says that the day wore on long, and they were hungry. And the disciples were like, "Well, we need to tell them to all go away so they can go get something to eat and rest." Well, Jesus said, "No, we'll just feed them ourselves." And kind of like Opie and Mr. Taylor, when they went to buy a bottle of pop, Opie was like, "Well, I got a bottle cap, a rubber band, and a paper clip in my pocket." That's kind of what they had, nothing. So they found a little boy. He had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Jesus blessed the fishes and the loaves, and he sent them out. And the disciples went and fed every single person. It says there were 5,000 men roughly. I've heard everything from including women and children, 9,000, 15,000, 20, 25,000 people. I don't know. I don't think that's important. The fact is, he fed them all with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And when they were done, it said that he was filled. They were all filled. The word glutton is in there. They ate and they ate because, these were not fallen fish. They weren't cursed fish. They did not exist until this day. So this is the best fish these people had ever eaten, just like that wine that he created out of water. Best wine they'd ever drank. So they ate and ate and ate. And when they were done, there were still 12 baskets full of fish and bread. Now there's all kinds of theories on what all that means. Well, it was for each disciple to give to their family. It was this or that. I simply think it means whether there's 5,000 people there, 10,000 people there, 50,000, there's still enough of Jesus left over to go out and share him with everybody else. No matter how much you tell people about Jesus, there's still one more. There's still 12 more. It doesn't matter how many baskets or how many people there were there, there's still more. So he said, "Gather up the fragments so that nothing be lost." That statement comes into play later on in this chapter. That is a very important statement. For if he's gathered us in, we're not going to be lost. We're in one hand, and God's got the hand on the other one. There's nothing that can get anything out of there. I was in a church one time, and he's like, there's a black belt in martial arts. He was doing the whole breaking boards and everything, and he had a marble. He says, "This marble is you. And let's say this is Jesus' hand. This is where you are. And God's hand comes over top of it. Which one of you wants to come try and get it out?" It's like, okay, this guy just broke a cinder block with his head. I'm not going to try and get it out. God has got us like that. Nothing will be lost. We are gathered unto him. But that comes in later. That just moved me to say it right now. Well, let's flip to Matthew, because I love this part of the story. Matthew chapter 14. It's his account of what happens next in the story in John. It says, "And straightway Jesus constrained the disciples to get into a ship and go before him to the other side, while the multitudes he would send them away." When I was first reading this in John, it says, in John it just says that the disciples got in the boat and they took off. And I was like, that sounds pretty weird. They just bailed on Jesus. Why would anybody bail on Jesus, you know? But then it tells us in Matthew that Jesus constrained his disciples to get in the ship and to go before him to the other side of the lake. And what's really weird about the word constrained is it means compelled. In the Greek, it means forcibly threatening to make them get into a boat. Because it's like, okay, you guys go on ahead. I'll be right here sending all the people away. No, we can't leave you. You know, come on, let's go. No, go. He had a reason. He knew everything that was going to happen. He knows what's going on in the world. So he sends all of his disciples away. Then he sends the multitudes away. And then he finally gets his alone time, and he goes up into the mountain to pray all by himself. Which leads us to one point of prayer. If Jesus did it, we should spend our time doing it. I've been in prayer very much these last week and a half, 2 weeks, actually the last year. And it is something that really does comfort when you're actually talking to God and knowing that your Father's there for you. But anyway, verse 23 of Matthew 14, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into the mountain to pray, and when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed by the waves, and the wind was contrary. They were in a bad storm, and it was the evening time. That's what I find very unique. Jesus knew they were in this bad storm, and it was in the evening. But it also says it was the fourth watch when Jesus went out and walked on the water to them. So that means they were on this incredible roller coaster ride of waves from roughly 9 o'clock at night till somewhere between 3 and 6 a.m. So imagine being filled up on fish and then riding a roller coaster for like 6 hours. Probably was not fun for the disciples. But just to move on here, let me Crider phrase a little bit of this. So Jesus notices them going out in the water. He's going to come to them. When you are in the midst of a storm, when you have the conflicts going on in your life, Jesus is there. And like Mikey said a little bit earlier today, it might not be right now where he comes to you. It might be a few hours down the road, a few days down the road. It's either yes, no, or hold on a few minutes, you know. That's God's answering of prayers. Well, he let the disciples kind of stew out there, and then he decided he would just go for a walk and go meet up with them. And it says in Mark, when he was walking out there, he almost walked right past them. You know, when Jesus is there, you got to look for him still. You've got to find him. He's there. But it's you that's got to reach to Jesus, which we'll see Peter here in a minute. When they walked by, they were all freaked out in the boat, thought there was a ghost on the waters walking around, and they started screaming like little girls. And then he says, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." I like that how Jesus would walk through walls into buildings, say, "Hey, peace be with you." You know, it's like he had that ability to startle folks. But when he walked out and said, "Be of good cheer, it is I, don't be afraid," Peter immediately wanted to go see him. He's like, "If that's you, bid me to come out there." He didn't want to just step out into the water. He waited for Jesus to tell him, which is a very good point for us to look at. Don't move unless the Lord moves you. God has got a plan for you. He's got a plan in your life. When you try to force it, bad things tend to start happening. When we look to Jesus, wait for him to move us. Wait upon the Lord. Strength will rise. Is that how the song we sing goes? When we wait on the Lord. So Peter's walking out to Jesus, but he gets a little off track and starts looking at the storm and the waves, because the pressures of life can get us down. But those pressures don't have to take us over. Because even though we start to slip a little bit in our faith, all we have to do is yell, just like Peter did, "Lord, save me." And it says immediately the Lord took Peter. They walked into the boat. It says that they were gladly received into the boat. When you call for Jesus and you gladly receive him, it says the storm stopped And they were immediately on the other side of the lake, just like that. The storms will end, no matter how big they are. These two little stories are not the main point of my message, sorry. But they are the good setup for it. False disciples tend to only look for what they can get out of you, what they can get out of a church. Whether it be, wow, Pastor John didn't tell me how to make $1 million today. I'm not coming back to that church. Wow, Mikey didn't throw on the fog machine. I'm not coming to that church. You know, there's usually something electric that's drawing people to these false type disciple churches. We have a very small church here. If someone walked in here and was a false type of disciple, you know, they'd stick out like a neon thumb around here, because we're pretty much just here to worship God. And that is a good thing, and that is what I do love about this church. But some people are in it for other things. When I first moved here to Dallas area, some people were trying to get me to come to their church because they had a football team, they had a volleyball team, they had a softball team. At this point in time, I was kind of a drunk. People kind of know that, so I was a drunk. Was not walking with the Lord at all. But even then, it was like, you know, this guy just told me all kinds of neat things. A band, a football team, softball team. He never once mentioned the preacher. Never once mentioned anything about the Word of God and what they were learning there and how they were growing there. If someone never mentions how they're growing in their church as far as spiritually, you might think there's something wrong with the shepherd and the sheep, because if the shepherd's off, the sheep are usually going to be off a little bit too. But these folks that were with Jesus, they all just got fed this big meal. The disciples just went to the other side of the sea. Jesus just joined them. And it says we're back to John chapter 6 now. John 6:22, it says that the following day, when the people stood on the other side of the sea, they saw that there was no other boat there save the one wherein the disciples were entered in, and that Jesus went not with the disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away alone. So they're like, when we wake up here, Jesus is going to be here. And then they wake up and Jesus is not there. How did Jesus get to the other side of the lake? Well, he went for a stroll. So these folks, they all, well, we got to get to the other side of the lake now, because you know what? It's breakfast time. So they all went to the other side of the lake to meet up with Jesus. And when they meet up with Jesus, they ask him, whoa, how did you get here? And Jesus did not answer them. Jesus answered them in a very strange way. It says in verse 26, it says, verily, verily, I say unto you, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. That is the only reason these people went to the other side of the lake, was that it was breakfast time. They wanted to get some more food. All the sick people had already been healed, I guess, and it was just time for breakfast. But this is what was chiefly on their mind. Jesus tells us in the next verse, labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. There's an interesting thing I read. They're talking about bread, but back in the old days, the baker of the bread would put a seal on his bread when it came out of the oven, so that when you're walking around, just like any marketing tool, people know where you got that bread. If they had some of their bread, they knew what baker to go to get that bread. If you see a bag of bread that had a red, blue, and a yellow dots all over it, you know it's Wonder Bread. So they all had theirs. His seal was from God the Father. He was the bread that he started talking about. There's a change in Jesus' tone now. We talked about barley loaves yesterday. Now we're talking about the bread of life today. You came for more fish sandwiches for breakfast. I'm here to give you something better. Let's go. So Jesus is pretty much telling them the what for and the what whys of how wrong they are about seeking after more food. And he's telling them that I am the bread that God has sealed. And it says Then they said unto him, Well, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? In verse 29 is a great statement. Then Jesus answered and said unto him, This is the work of God, that ye believe on him who he hath sent. So basically, if you believe on Jesus, well, we come to find out there's a little bit more to that here later on in this chapter also. It's not just, okay, well, we believe in you, Jesus. You're this great prophet. That's what they said earlier. They said, oh, this is that prophet. Oh, I skipped a very, very huge point in Matthew. That's why I went to Matthew. I am so sorry. But in Matthew, when he got in the boat, this was the very first time. Let me read it for you. I am so sorry. In Matthew, verse 14, or chapter 14, verse 33, it says, Then they that were in the ship came, and they worshipped him, saying unto him, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. So that's kind of an important thing to forget and leave out of my message, huh? Sorry about that. Like I said, I am not Pastor John, so if you're visiting, please come back Sunday. But the people said, You're that great prophet that's been told about. But the disciples, they said, Truly, you're the Son of God. There's a difference in the great prophet versus the Son of God. There's a religion out there that has a great prophet, but he didn't die for any of them. He just died. He's still buried somewhere. There's a Buddha, there's hundreds of millions of Hindu gods, and none of them can get the job done. There's plenty of great prophets that have walked the earth. There's only one Son of God that's walked the earth, and that's the one who is now proclaiming, I am that bread of life. This is the work of God, that ye believe on me, on him who has sent me. That's one of the basic starting points of our Christian belief. It's just believing that Jesus is the Son of God. And where it says believe there, it's that neat little Greek word, pisteuo, which basically means faith. So it basically says that ye faithed on him. By grace are you saved through faith. It goes on to say in verse 30, Then they said, therefore unto him, Well, what sign will you show us then, that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Now, where were these people yesterday? They were getting fed from 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and now today they're saying, well, what are you going to do to show us this? Don't you know Moses gave us manna? They're still trying to do this subliminal thing to Jesus. Hey, it's breakfast time. Bust out some food for us. Jesus is not going to fall for that. Jesus went ahead and he told them straight up, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth it to you, the true bread from heaven. Jesus is now proclaiming to them that I came from heaven, which is going to be a real stumbling block for the Jews later on in this chapter. But Jesus, the people knew who his parents were. He was in Galilee. They knew who he was. And they wanted to contest with him about who he was. And that comes up a little bit later. But verily I say unto you, I am this bread. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. The life that he's talking about here is the word Zoe, spiritual life, not bios, like biology, living things. I can get lost in one page of notes. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. That's verse 34. We'll just keep on going. I guess what I had to say there was not that important. And Jesus said to them, I am this bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said to you that ye also have seen me, and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at that last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son, and believeth on him, may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up in that last day. It says, the Jews murmured at him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. They're just not getting this. And they said next, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph? His father and mother, don't we know him? How is it then that he saith, I come down from heaven? They had a real issue with him proclaiming to come down from heaven, because there's only one person that can come down from heaven, and that would be the Son of God. They had a real issue with anyone proclaiming to be the Son of God because of the simple word blasphemy. It was punishable by death. If you were to put yourself in a place equal with the Father, which he liked to do, that was punishable by death. And we find out later on in Jesus' life, their punishment was death. But he was the first of the resurrection. He rose up. And in that last day, he's going to raise us up too. But all that the Father has given him, that giveth me, shall come to me, and him that cometh to me, I will in no wise cast out. That's when we get back to that illustration about the marble. He's got us. If you come to him, he's not going to say, no, I'm sorry, you've sinned too much. He's not going to cast you out. It says our righteousness is filthy rags. Even as a Christian, as a saved person, our righteousness is filthy rags. Before I got saved, before January 9th, 2003, I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. And if someone would have told me on that day for the first time that Jesus loved me and would forgive me of all my sins, I just said, you got to be kidding me. I am high as a kite. But I knew. Teach them as a child. That's one of the best ways. Teach them as a child. When they get older, it was in my brain. Ruby, last Thursday night we were praying, and she was just talking to God, which is what prayer is, basically talking to God. And Ruby prayed, you know, God, I just don't understand how I can know you, understand, feel your love, feel your joy, but these other people just say no to it. I don't understand that. And I was reading that morning when Ruby was praying this to God. It's like, Lord, help me understand. How can I love you? But these other people just don't even want to hear about you. In fact, they curse you. Well, I brought Ruby's answer tonight, so you're going to have to tell her when you get home. That God has favor on who he chooses to have favor. God has mercy upon who he has mercy on, and compassion on who he has compassion on. It says that he loved Jacob and hated Esau. That was in the womb. Esau had never done anything bad. Jacob had never done anything good. In fact, he went on a long time not doing much good, but he got it right in the end. But it doesn't matter who we are, what we've done. We can come to him. But it goes on to tell us next, it says, murmur not yourselves, no man can come to me, except the Father which hath sent me, draw him to me. That's one of those little stumbling little verses, like, wow, what does that mean? I do not know. But it means we're here, the Father's going to pull us. The predestination thing, a long time ago before the foundations of the earth, he knew I was going to get saved. So he already knew it. He did not say, okay, hell, heaven, hell, heaven, hell, heaven. That's not what it was all about. He knew who was going to accept his son, and those are who he drawed to. My dad always said it was like an Easter egg hunt. The eggs are there, you just got to go find them and give them the gospel. So, but the Father's got to draw them to him. That's how people can sit around cursing God. That's how people can absolutely hate everything that we stand for. I mean, it's such a terrible thing to not want to have children murdered and to, well, we won't go into all the political stuff because I already got in trouble by saying marriages between one man and one woman this week, so we won't go into all that. So, no man comes to me, verse 44 again, no man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at that last day. And it says, it is written in the prophets, and they shall be all taught of God. Every man therefore that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. Not that any man hath seen the Father, save he which is of God. He shall see the Father. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. I am the bread of life. So there he goes with the whole bread terminology again, that he is that bread. And they're still thinking about breakfast, I'm sure. But it goes on to say next, your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness. And you know what? They're all dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Jesus didn't just come for me. He didn't die for my sins. He died for the sin of the world as a whole. I am so grateful I'm caught up into that whole. But this bread, like I said, there's enough for everybody. It's just sad that people don't want to eat of it. People don't want to accept it. People don't want to take of that bread that Jesus has put out there for us. But these people had it all in their brain. Where's breakfast? And now the Jews started to strive among themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Oh, I skipped that verse. I'm sorry. Verse 49, your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness, and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. This is where they had the problem with, how are we going to eat his flesh? This is when he's making the reference to, okay, I'm the Messiah. You guys wanted to make me king earlier in the day, but I'm here to die. That was a real problem for some of them. In fact, it was a real problem for Judas. The Jews did not believe their Messiah would come and die. They believed he was going to come and relieve them from the Roman tyranny, which he did in a spiritual sense, not in a physical sense. But it goes on to say next, verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat my flesh of the Son of Man, and drink his blood, ye have no life in you. Now, drinking blood in the Jewish culture was absolutely a no-no. That was in the book of Exodus, that you're not supposed to drink anything with blood. Do not drink blood, do not eat anything with blood. Hebrew National Hot Dogs got a rabbi that sits there watching all the meat come down, making sure there's no blood in that meat so he can proclaim it kosher. I don't like blood in my food. I'm kind of a well-done guy myself. So, what is this blood that he's talking about? In Hebrews in 10 and 15, I think John will get there eventually. But the Catholics have taken this verse and have completely mutilated it. When Jesus hung on the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished." Eating his flesh and drinking his blood is a picture of our faith in him, that he came, the Son of God, made flesh, died on a cross. His blood was poured out for our sins. That's what washes our sins clear. He took that blood to the mercy seat in heaven and presented it before God, a perfect sacrifice. Oh, that's not the right verse. Why did I say that? 24:9, I'm sorry. For Christ has not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself now, to appear in the presence of God for us. He went into heaven with his own blood and put it on the mercy seat. When Jesus was on that cross, he cried out, "It is finished. It's done." The Catholic Church is teaching that every time you take Mass, you're eating his flesh and you're drinking his actual blood, and that he is dying perpetually over and over and over again for your sins. He said on the cross, "It is finished." Not, "It has begun." No, it's finished. So, this is what they were not understanding. This is what they were refusing to understand. See, verse 55. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood dwelleth in me, and I in him. As the living Father hath sent me, and I live by the Father, so he that eateth me, even he shall live by me. This is that bread which shall come down from heaven, not as your fathers did eat manna, and are dead. He that eateth of this bread shall live forever. These things said he in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. It's kind of funny that we have just reached a point where a tragic U-turn in the disciples is going to happen, because it was this synagogue in Capernaum in Mark, the very first miracle that Jesus did in the recordings of Mark was casting out a demon in this same synagogue. And the people there were all, "Wow, this is that great prophet." Once again, this is kind of where his ministry started in the book of Mark, was in this same synagogue in Capernaum. But this is also where he sorted out the goats from the sheep. It goes on to say in the next verses, many therefore of his disciples, when they had heard this, said, "This is a hard saying, who can hear it?" This is very confusing stuff that he just said, and it's very hard, and it's tough to hear, and it's tough to listen to. And that's why they say this is a spiritual book. You don't get it unless you're in the Spirit. But there are some things that even the best don't get still. But they couldn't get any of it. They didn't want to admit any of it. And when Jesus knew in himself that his disciples murmured at it, he said unto them, "Does this offend you? What if ye shall see me, the Son of Man, ascend up where he was before?" What if you see me go back into heaven? Will you believe me now? It is the Spirit that quickeneth the flesh, which brings life to the flesh. The flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit, and they are life. But there are some of you that believe not. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were that believed and who would not believe. And he also knew who would betray him. And he said, Therefore said I unto you, that no man can come unto me, except it were given unto him of the Father. And from that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. This is a finalizing statement. It's not a oh, well, we're just going to go home and pray about this for a while. It was like they were giving up on Jesus. Like, this is just way too weird stuff, eating flesh, drinking blood. He's going to go back into heaven where he came from. He came from Joseph and Mary. We know who his parents are. We know that Jesus is the Son of God, because we have a book that tells us and a spirit that tells us that this is true. They did not have this book, and they weren't willing to open up for the Spirit to talk to them. Because basically, when they just started murmuring at the end, they're saying, hey, dudes, I don't think we're getting any breakfast. And they left. Spiritual food is not what they wanted. Spiritual food is what will sustain you when the storms come in life. I have lived many, many a day without physical food. God has taken care of me. I have lived couch to couch. I have lived in a car before. God sustains you. God's with you. It's the spiritual food, and I might be living in a car again here soon. But it's the spiritual food that we're supposed to come after. The false disciples, they're attracted to crowds, they're attracted to the excitement. They like supernatural promises. Hey, there's going to be a great healing service down here tonight. Oh, you're really sick. You can't come up to the front. It's already full. Kind of nasty little things that happen. They care for only earthly benefits, and they really didn't like anything that the gospel has to say. And that's what it all came down to with these disciples that Jesus called them when they walked away. Nobody disputed the miracles that he did. Not one person has ever said, well, Jesus never fed 5,000 men. No one's ever said he didn't cast out demons. Even the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who hated him the most, never said he didn't do that. Nobody cared if he fed the poor, fed the children. Like, apparently the American humanists hate people who feed Haitian children who are starving. But Jesus fed, he cast out demons, he healed, and no one had a problem with that. It was his words that they had a problem with. You can go to churches and hear all kinds of fancy flowery words that are just going to make you feel, oh yeah, I just saved $45 an hour at the psychiatrist. I'm all boosted up today. I'm ready to go. But you didn't really hear no gospel. It wasn't the acts of Jesus that people hated. It was Jesus' words that they hated. And they have no desire for true worship. They have only desires for personal prosperity and fulfillment. That's just personal stuff. The work of God is truly spiritual. There's no way I could have got through the funeral I did without God. That was just amazing how that all happened. But all we have to do is reach out and ask for him, and he is there for us. His Spirit will guide us. His Spirit will take control of us. There's many people here that are going through rough times right now. God's here for us. A picture I showed of a rainbow behind a stinking, dirty cloud. It was the ugliest picture I think I've ever taken, because it was just a dirty cloud with a rainbow behind it. And a lightning bolt went off right behind that cloud, and that rainbow lit up neon right through the haze and the dirt. And it said, God has a promise out there. It looks hazy sometimes, but he is the light. Follow the light. He's got you. Just hang on. The storm might last an hour. The storm might last all night. Hold on to your fish sticks. Jesus is coming.